Alright guys, so I finally tore the E55's engine apart, and I finally found out what actually caused the engine to blow. And weirdly, it was something that I didn't even expect, and it's something that I think every other E55 owner should know about too, because this is potentially something that can happen in every other E55 in some point at its life. In fact, with any other car with that oil pump actually, not just any other E55. So I guess I'll start off by showing you guys the damages, and I'll also soon upload the video on the teardown, how I actually took this engine apart. But for now, I just want to get it into all the damages and what actually caused it. So right when I first took the engine apart and I had a look at the cams, there was actually scoring on the cams. So you can see the score marks right here. And this is actually really interesting because I had a look at these cams a week before I went on that track day when the engine blew. And there was no score marks on these cams. So this all actually happened really quickly. It all happened within a week. So, and here's the other side. The other side also has the score marks on the cams. This is the left side of the engine, that's the right side of the engine. So this is the head that got hit by the piston. This is cylinder 5, the side on which the connecting rod broke. And this was the valve that got hit by the piston. So obviously when the connecting rod broke, the piston came up and it hit the valve, which is why this valve is actually bent. It doesn't close properly anymore. And you can see the mark that the piston left right here. And the piston also hit this part of the head over here. And if you look at the cylinders, all the cylinders are also scored. And so that also shows you there was some issue with the oil, that like all this wasn't being lubricated properly. And this is the piston for cylinder 5. This is cylinder 5, and you can see that the piston's actually stuck in there. So that's the side on which the connecting rod broke, and it actually tore the entire block apart. And the piston's also, like, the piston's supposed to go this way, and it's actually twisted inside, and it's also twisted this way. So it actually dug into the block and it's stuck there. I tried taking it out, but there's no way to take it out. And if you look at the crank also has the same scoring on it. So that also suggests that, like, obviously oil wasn't flowing through this. I already checked all the lines, and all the lines are open. I blew air through them, and there's actually air flowing through all these passages. So the oil passages were open. Here's all the pistons and all the connecting rods and their bearings over here. And these are the bearings that went inside that hold the crank. So these are the crank bearings, and these are the connecting rod bearings. And the crank bearings also are all scored up. And the connecting rod bearings were also all scored, and they were all spun too. So like all these bearings were spun. Just to tell you what a spun bearing is that these bearings go inside the connecting rod like this. And they're supposed to be held with the connecting rod, so like they're supposed to move with the connecting rod. A spun bearing is when these bearings start spinning inside the connecting rod like this. And the reason that's not good is because they will start wearing out the connecting rod, and you'll also see scoring at the back of these bearings. So these bearings should only be rubbing on this side, not on this side. But all these bearings were spun, so there's wear on both sides of these bearings. And when I found them, I found all of them in different positions, not in the position that they should be in. And this was actually the bearing that's the most badly worn. You can actually see the copper in it. All the other bearings, like, they were spun, but they weren't worn this badly. And if you see the thickness of even this bearing is still pretty thick. So that also suggests that whatever happened wasn't going on for too long. Like, all these bearings spun, but like, if these bearings had been spinning for a long time, they would have worn out to like really thin. And this is in fact the connecting rod that broke. This is the connecting rod from cylinder 5. So this is cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8. So cylinder 5 is the one where the piston is stuck inside the block. That's why you don't see a piston over here. You just see a broken part of the piston. And here's where the connecting rod actually broke from. Now I'm not sure why this connecting rod actually broke, whether it was because the piston got stuck in the block and the crank tried to pull it down and that's what broke it, or whether it was something else. I'm not actually sure why it broke, but I believe this was the bearing that actually went inside this rod. And I actually found this inside the block, and the reason why I believe this is the bearing from this is because it has the same like scoring on it like all the other bearings have, and it's actually the same thickness and the same length as a bearing. So I believe this was the bearing that went inside here, and this is what's left of it now. And even the thickness of this, if you look at the thickness, it's not like this bearing got worn down completely. It's just that like it heated up so much and it just melted apart. That's what I think happened, because When you look at the crankshaft over here, this is where the connecting rod for cylinder 5 went, and this is actually all burnt. So like this is the color it should be, and you can see that this is all discolored and it's all yeah, it's basically all burnt. So yeah, that definitely suggests that this connecting rod wasn't getting any oil at all, and that's why it heated up so much that the connecting rod basically just fell apart and it just blew the entire engine. Now, the reason why the engine lost oil pressure and all this actually happened was because of something extremely small, which I wish I knew before and which could have been easily prevented. But just to show you guys the oil pump, this is the oil pump. It's a little damaged now because it got hit by the connecting rod, but it had nothing to do with the damage. The damage actually happened after the cause, which actually like caused all this engine to blow. And well, first of all, just to show you guys how this oil system actually works, because it's quite a lot different than what you'll see in most cars. It actually has like these two sumps. There's one smaller sump at the front and then there's one larger sump at the back. And the reason I believe they designed it like this is because if you have a look at the subframe, here's the place where the larger sump goes at the back over here, and this is the place where the smaller sump goes. So the thing is, at the front, they couldn't possibly put a larger sump over here. If you look at the same engine, if you look at an M113K in a CL or in an S-Class, the S55 or the CL55, they actually have a completely different oil system. So they just have one big sump at the front, and there's no sump at the back. But I guess because in this engine, like, it was impossible to put a larger sump here because of all this subframe and the anti-roll bar. That's why they, I guess, split the sump into two. So there's a smaller sump at the front and there's a larger sump at the back. And because they had two sumps, they have to have two collectors. So there's one collector in this sump and there's one collector in this sump. And the way the system works is that the pump also has two stages. So this first stage over here, this front stage, is just the scavenging stage. So all it does is it scavenges oil from this sump at the front, and it takes this oil. The oil goes through this pump over here. It feeds the oil into this pipe, and then this oil flows through this pipe back into this sump. This is the main sump. This is the sump that actually supplies oil to the engine, and it's at the back. And this is the main collector pipe, and it goes to this pump. This section of the pump is the main section that actually supplies oil to your entire engine. And it's actually linked to this collector pipe, and this collector pipe sucks oil in from this sump. So this is the main sump. That's why this is the sump that has the oil level sensor and the dipstick over here, because this is the oil sump that matters. This is always supposed to have oil in it. The front one is just the dry sump. So like this wouldn't have any oil in it when the engine is actually started, because all the oil in this sump would be sucked by this scavenging pump, and it would actually be pumped into this sump. So whenever your engine is started, this sump would actually pretty much be dry, and this is the main sump that will contain all the oil that is supplied to your engine. Now the problem that happened is that this is the main collector pipe that sucks all the oil in that goes through your entire engine. If anything happens on this pipe here, your engine will basically lose all the oil supply. And this is what I found when I took this collector pipe out. There's just this one rubber O-ring over here that seals this collector pipe to the pump. And if there's any leak in here, obviously the collector pipe will never suck in oil. It will actually start sucking in air. It's like trying to suck oil through a straw. Like if you're trying to suck oil through a straw and there's a hole in your straw, obviously you won't be able to suck the oil. You'll only be sucking in air. So with this broken O-ring over here, I believe this pump was never sucking in any oil from this sump over here. And that's why the engine lost all oil pressure and basically destroyed itself in a matter of 3 laps. If you look at this O-ring, I'll just take it off to show you guys. This O-ring is basically it's basically become a plastic now. It's become so hard. And this broken piece over here was also nowhere to be found, because the thing is, this broken piece cannot escape from here because there's a lip over here. There's no way the broken piece could have escaped this way. So the only way it went was inside the pump. But this is, I'm sure enough, definitely what caused the issue, because with this O-ring broken, there's no way that this pump would be able to suck any oil from this oil sump, and since this is the only pump that supplies oil to your entire engine, with this O-ring broken, your engine would obviously lose all its oil supply and basically fall apart in a matter of like a few minutes. So yeah, after all that teardown, after taking everything apart, this is what I found. This is what the problem was. And in fact, these cars do have a common issue of these O-rings leaking. There's actually a similar O-ring that sits inside this oil level sensor over here, which most people actually know about, that it starts leaking after a while. I believe why these rubbers start leaking is because the oil gets really hot and it goes through a lot of heat cycles. So over time, these rubbers like become really hard and then they start breaking or start leaking. The reason why everyone knows about that one is because there's actually a visual leak whenever these get hard and they start leaking. You actually see the leak. You actually see oil all underneath the car. But with this one, this rubber is actually inside the engine, so even when it gets hard and when it starts leaking, you would never be able to tell because this is like deep inside your engine. The other problem with these cars is, the problem I was really surprised to learn about is that there's no oil pressure sensor in the entire engine. So there's one oil level sensor and then there's an oil temperature sensor, but there's no oil pressure sensor in the entire car. So when this O-ring breaks and when your engine loses oil pressure, there basically would be no warning. So that's why I was driving around the track and there was no oil warning lights. The only thing that told me that there was a problem was when the engine blew. So yeah, unfortunately I had to learn it the hard way. I think the biggest lesson over here is always monitor your oil pressures. Install an oil pressure gauge in your car. I always thought that these engines did have an oil pressure gauge. It's only now that I tore the entire engine apart and I found no oil pressure sensor in the engine when I found out that there is no oil pressure sensor in these cars. So yeah, that's definitely the biggest lesson for me, that always keep your oil pressures in check, because issues like this, like, there would be no warning. They would just destroy your entire engine. And just to give you guys a bit of good news after all this destruction and everything, I was able to find a used M113K engine, and I already bought it. But I do want to do some work on it before I put it in the car, so I actually do want to take it apart and see what condition it's in, because that's a high mileage engine. It has a 188 kilometers on it. This engine in fact had 200,000 kilometers on it as well. Over 200,000 kilometers on it. And it was actually surprising to see how well everything inside the engine was, other than this oil issue. So I think if this issue didn't happen, this engine would have lasted a long time. So I think it was an incredibly good engine. But the next engine, like, the first thing I'm going to do on it is definitely change this O-ring inside the oil pump. And I think it's going to be interesting seeing what condition that O-ring comes out in. Like, it's from a completely different engine, from a completely different car. And if that one's hardened too, then this is definitely something that everyone should be really careful of. But yeah, I'll definitely find that out really soon too. But other than that, yeah, I think while I'm at it, I'll also probably add a few baffles in the oil sump. Other than that, I don't think this oil sump needs too much work. It's a really good design, and it wouldn't have failed other than this O-ring. This is the only thing that would have failed in it. So yeah, unfortunately it did fail. But I think it's a really good thing that I did figure this out, because if I didn't figure this out, I would have always thought that it was an oil starvation, like it was an oil starvation issue due to like cornering forces or something like that. Because this was extremely unexpected. I did not expect to find something like this at all. But now that I did find it, it actually makes a lot of sense why the engine blew the way it did. So yeah, I think that was the most mind-blowing conclusion after taking this whole engine apart, that like this whole engine blew just because of this cheap $3 O-ring. And if this was replaced in time, none of this would have happened. So yeah, that's everything for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about this issue, or if you have had this issue with other models that use this oil pump, or if you've heard anyone else having this issue. But anyways, that's everything for now, and thanks for watching. And I'll try to get the teardown video uploaded soon too.